so before I get started, I thought I want to do a quick poll of the audience. So how many of you sort of consider yourself to be more on the customer service side? Can you get a quick show of hands? Okay, how about marketing? Okay, how about others? All right, so we got a lot of marketing people in the room, so that I think we'll have a great conversation as you can hear and see why service should be something that you should consider. So to get started on this conversation, I want to sort of set the context, right? Why are we talking about this? You're here. You know that your customers, your consumer out there, they're demanding authentic. They want real stuff, right? Social is real. I think that was said yesterday. They want human, right? Brian Solis and Brian Kramer this morning. Customers are demanding human interaction. So marketing cannot really be just what we used to do, which is painting a fantastical pictures or projections or image of what the product or the service to be, and then try to convince you that this is what you should invest or spend your money on. Right? Marketing can't do that anymore. In fact, I was just in the other panel with Tim, and he was saying, Tim Manahan from SAP, he was saying marketing is not really relevant anymore, right? Because people just don't trust what we said. The first thing that if they hear that is coming out from marketing, there's a question mark. We're looking for truth. We're looking for authenticity. Right? I think Seth Godin, you brought this point. Seth Godin said that marketing used to be about telling people what you do. Marketing is now about doing it, right? Showing what you said, right? Action is word 1,000 words. So customer service is really at the heart of this interaction, this engagement as your customers went on this journey. And really, we hear about the buying journey, right? And I would say the journey is beyond buying. It's the complete journey, and there's no beginning, there's no end, right? So customer service earn your right to be a companion on that part of the journey. And customer service really should help company by helping the customer and engaging with them and nudge them from one step of the journey to the next step, right? Whether that be consideration to buying, or buying to rebuying, right? Or referral. So we like to think of that customer service more than just solving a customer problem. It's really giving you, the enterprise, the company, the brand, the right to be a companion with that customer on that journey. So I want to share some statistics just to kickstart the conversations, right? This is from a survey from American Express that was done a couple of years ago. So it's a little age, but I think a lot of the data still makes sense, right? 48% of the consumer will say good thing or mention the good experience that they have with a company. That's word of mouth marketing, right? 66% will actually spend more for great customer service. Think of that, right? Revenue. Now, the opposite is also true, unfortunately. 78% will stop buying or will stop the consideration once they hear bad service or they hear of unpleasant experience that they have with a brand. So with that, let's start the discussion with our panel with a basic question. So let's start with Shep. Do you agree with this premise or not? Or why? And why?
Yes. No, and I'll go on record on saying that sometimes we confuse customer service with customer experience. And I believe the entire experience is about marketing today. It comes from the very first interaction we have, which could be a person-to-person interaction. It could be some type of advertising. It comes from the interaction we have with via social channels, in person, online. Comes from a website. You know, websites were designed by people for people, so I always believe there's always people involved. So I think the total experience is what plays into the marketing. And your comment that you mentioned, Seth Godin, marketing isn't telling anymore, it's doing. And I think just as important as doing is proving that the consumer or the customer made the right decision to do business with you. And once they know they've made it, your stats show it, that 48% will praise. But what's interesting is how they praise. They praise loud with an amplifier on their social channels.
Dan?
So at Discover, you may or may not have seen our commercials over the last couple of years, but we have a tagline that is, "We treat you like you treat you." And they're very popular commercials. We get great feedback. But I've always said that at its core, the TV commercial is telling you to trust us that we have good service. Right? And I think another thing that Seth Godin said was show beats tell every time. And what I love about customer service and social media, it is the only channel in which you can demonstrate how great your service is publicly. And so that, of course, means, and anybody that heard me in the panel yesterday heard me say this as well, you have to actually be good at customer service in order to be able to do it in social. If you're not, social is going to ruin you. But if you are strong at customer service, and Discover's had a long tradition of that, we're the first credit card company to have 24/7 customer service, which seems so quaint right now. We're also still the only one that has entirely 100% US-based customer service, very, very important to our customers. So we're already good at that, and social then becomes the channel that we can show people how good it is and not just tell them.
And so my answer is yes, because the way that I think about marketing, and I think a lot of us are beginning to think about marketing, is it isn't Mad Men anymore. We're not here to tell a story, but I think that all we've heard today and that we hear in best practices and that our data shows us is that marketing is about supporting the customer through their entire life cycle. And that includes everything from how do we inspire them to think about what they want to do with the goods and services that we sell, how do we make the purchase experience really fantastic. So in fact, in a Whole Foods Market store, when you're interacting with a team member and they're helping you find a product, that's marketing. And then in the end, if you have an issue or you have a question, that's marketing too, because what we're saying to you is we didn't leave you when you left our store, we're with you the whole way. So if you accept the premise that marketing is about the entire customer journey, which we do, then all of a sudden, of course, customer service is marketing. And I think what we all know about digital marketing and social marketing is that the whole organization has to get involved. And so all of a sudden, marketing becomes an activity for the business, all the way to product support, product development. If you're listening to what your customers are telling you about what products you need to sell, what features need to be in your product, and a lot of that comes through customer service, and you integrate that into your product so that you can then say to your customer, look, we met your need. Everybody is in marketing because today it's about conversation with the customer, supporting the customer. And I think as we saw with Jeremiah this morning, people are clearly saying, I want to have a voice not only in the kind of conversation I have with you as a brand, but also potentially in the products that you create and how I work with them. And so I think my perspective is because I've changed the way that I think about marketing over the years to be a full 360 journey of the customer, which is hopefully lather, rinse, repeat on a regular basis, depending on what you sell. Then of course customer service has to be part of that because everybody in the organization is ultimately helping to sell and market their business.
Great, great. Any questions from the audience? So let's delve on this question a little bit. So you guys all represent mostly business to consumer enterprise, right? Was wondering, maybe Shep or anyone else on the panels, what do you think, is this true also for business to business type enterprise?
Well, definitely. I think service in general, it's table stakes. You get in the game if you're not going to compete. There's always going to be a competitor. There's there's so few companies out there that really aren't a commodity that doesn't have somebody else doing something similar. And I'll argue that in B2B especially, great service allows you the right to come back and bid on, if you're the supplier, you have the right to bid, you have the right to help shape the bids based on past experience. I work a lot with the government and military. Now that's an interesting group of people. And when they go out to their suppliers and they're looking for bids, they ask their suppliers to help shape the proposal. And it's all based on the trust that's earned in the service and the way they deliver. Hence, they've decommoditized themselves. And on the B2C examples, I mean, that's primarily I mean, why would a customer do business with this credit card company if they could get better service? And by the way, congratulations to Discover for nailing it with the J.D. Power Award.
Thank you, that was a good day.
Yeah, that was a great day.
Well, and I think I can speak to it as someone who participates in the B2B process. So I am a buyer of services and tools as someone who manages social and other activities. And I can tell you that when I speak to my peers about how they feel about their existing service providers, we absolutely talk about features and functionality, but what I can tell you is that we talk more about customer service. We discuss the kind of relationships that we have with our partners. We talk about whether they serve us well, what customer service after the purchase looks like. Are they there for us? You know what, things break, right? That's just the reality of technology, and I'm okay with that. But how do they help us? How do they support us? And so I believe that as much as you may not see it manifest itself as much in social, because it's really hard, I think, sometimes to talk about those things in 140 characters versus saying to Whole Foods, like, hey, I really hated that smoothie. That's easy.
Right.
I think that we see it manifest itself, because people are people, they're going to talk. Word of mouth is real. So I would say it's actually more important in B2B because often the price tags are larger, and acquiring a customer away from a competitor can be exceptionally difficult once they're entrenched. So that's my perspective as a participant in that activity.
Great, great. And I mean, I can see, just speaking from SAP's perspective, right? Certainly service and our level of support is a big factor in our customers' willingness to go on the journey with us, right? It makes a huge difference. And I think when we talk about cloud and collaborative, I think as we move into that stage of the economy, it's becoming more and more important, a key differentiator for a company, whether you're selling to business or you're selling to consumer. So any questions from the audience? Okay. All right, so I think we established the fact that, yes, at least this panelists agree, service is the new marketing. What's the implication? What's the implication for customer service, for marketing in this new world? Why don't we start with Dan?
I'll start. I actually want to play on something that Shep said about customer service being table stakes. What I think is so interesting is how many companies today do customer service so poorly. And so, yeah, it is. I agree that it should be table stakes, but I don't think enough companies treat it that way. And so, I think that the answer to your question, Hansen, is that customer service can very easily become a differentiator for a product or service that is in a very competitive industry, like the credit card industry. I had an experience last week with an unnamed national cable company owned by a television station.
What's their initials?
And you know, I mean, 7 phone calls, clearly crossing 3 or 4 continents, a tweet, and some other interactions later, and I still don't have my problem answered. And I got a response to my tweet from this website that now is my new favorite website, that's called CEO Emails. And they said to me, well, why don't you write an email to the CEO? And I'm like, gosh, I never even thought of that. 12 minutes later, I received a response to my inquiry and had a very senior person working on my case. But it shouldn't come to that.
Right.
Like that's not how service should work. And so the way that we approach it at Discover is, and it's a pretty simple maxim, we want to service customers in the channel that they want to be serviced in. And if somebody tweets at us, one thing that you can guarantee is they didn't want to call us. So by answering and saying, well, can you please call us, you are not helping their problem at all. Similarly, people that take to email want a response via email. If they wanted a response in some other channel, they would have used some other channel. And so, you know, some of this stuff, as I talk about it, seems simple,
right.
But then we all have experiences like the one I just described with companies that are not doing it and are not even close.
Right. So even just getting to the table stake, like you said, we're not there yet in many of the industries or some of the companies there. But Natantya, do you?
I was just saying +1 to answering in the channel in which they started. Even if you have to move them someplace later because of complexities or PII, like the tweets that come back at me and say, please email me, and it's like, no, I tweeted you for a reason. I think the other thing to your point is it is table stakes, and the table stakes have all of a sudden gotten much broader because I think businesses in some ways are very used to thinking about call centers and phone, and if they don't have that right, but let me tell you that social is for real. And I think the other sort of issue that it's going to create for businesses is recognizing that all channels are equal in terms of the need to respond to them. And that becomes really tough for businesses, especially ones that are challenged a little bit with taking social seriously at all. I think for those of you who were in the keynote yesterday morning and someone said, you know, oh, don't talk to me about the social team, right? And there's this dismissal, I think, sometimes of these other channels. And the reality is that customers are coming at us from every possible direction. So in addition to your point, just needing to make customer service good to begin with, and then layering on the taking seriously of social as a customer voice and channel, I think is making it hard for some businesses who are already understaffing social, or they've outsourced it entirely to an agency. So I think it's creating some issues in the business as businesses try to figure out how to service all these channels, because there's a real cost associated with it. The good news is I actually believe it's one of the easiest places that you can prove ROI. And so, you know, if you're willing to have somebody who can champion that, but it's definitely a wake-up call, I think, to the business. And you're right, you just got to have a good cultural attitude about customer service in the first place.
Right, and I just, as you were talking about moving people from one channel to the next and people tweeting and responding to them, if I want my question answered in 2 or 3 hours, I would have waited for my question to make it in 2 or 3 hours. Too many times there's this lag in between. And in-person service versus social, and I won't tell you the name of the airline, but their initials are AA, for anonymous airlines, if you know what I mean, and I think you do. So here's what happens. You know, I have a flight that cancels, and I'm freaked out. I've got to make a connection. I've got to get to my speech. And I'm at the airport in Dallas, which will give you another hint. And there's long lines, and then I call the executive platinum number, and there's a wait. They say they'll call me back in 30 minutes. They have that automated ability to do so. Then I tweet a direct message to AA, and I tell them my flight. I give them my frequent flyer number. My flight's been canceled. Please help. And within 5 minutes, they tweet back a great response and get me taken care of. And that shows you that social channels are sometimes better. But I also want to add to something else, is that sometimes people and companies think of this whole social customer service thing as a responsive mechanism. And Natantya, you and I talked about this morning. It's not just about monitoring and then making comments back to people who comment about us, especially the negative comments that might come in. It's also an opportunity to build community and create value-added content that goes out. I believe that's every bit a part of the customer service and experience that we can provide at a social platform.
Okay.
You're touching, Shep, on this question that often gets asked of whether social media is the first or last channel of resort. And I think that for those of us that have been doing it for a little while, we've seen that shift. It used to be that, you know, what Shep was saying is usually consistent, is I've tried the other channels, now let me try to do something publicly and see if they'll pay attention. But we're seeing it discovers a lot of people now are starting with Twitter. And that, of course, increases the stakes for us being able to handle it right there and then, because then, to your point about ROI, you're talking about a cost savings of avoiding a future phone call, right? So I want to solve that problem in Twitter because I don't want them to then call me with the same problem. So we call that, much like in the call center parlance, one of the metrics you look at is first call resolution. I like to call it first tweet resolution.
First interaction resolution.
Exactly. It really doesn't matter in which channel, but it is important. It is important to get it right the first time.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, question.
Shep, your story about anonymous airlines brought up KLM actually puts their estimated response time on their Twitter profile picture, which I thought was interesting. And Dan, you talked about how Discover has 19 minutes, so there's the time factor. But how do you know? There's a lot of talk about turning a detractor into an advocate and how valuable that is. How do you assess when you want to get into detail publicly interacting with people, if we want to get them off the channel? how do you assess what's something that you want to like address or move on or not respond to at all?
So let me repeat the question for the audience. The question was, how do you determine when to get involved and whether you're going to invest the resource to try to turn this detractor into potentially a fan of the brand?
Publicly, when you want to take them off mind, work with them.
And do you consider things like if I tweet and I have 2 followers and someone else with a big, huge following, does that play at all into it?
Right.
Go ahead. I'll start. Those are great questions. Absolutely not. We don't look at the number of followers. Not important. If you're a customer and you need help from us, we want to treat all the customers equally. I saw a stat, I can't even remember which session it was in, that actually I didn't know before, which was that people who tweet positive sentiment at a brand expect a response more often than people who tweet negative responses. And that was fascinating to me because I would have totally guessed it was the opposite. And so obviously responding to the positive tweets is fun, and our reps love to do that because that's engagement, that's community. We love our brand, customer loves our brand, let's talk about our brand, everybody's happy. I think on the negative side, it is equally important to address the core issue, right? And I think that what we teach our reps is be empathetic, identify with the customer's problem, say sorry if we did something wrong, and then get to the fix. And what we see over and over again is that when people start off negative and you A, respond, and B, respond quickly, and C, solve their problem, they often will turn from a detractor into a promoter. My favorite story that I love to tell is a guy that was tweeting at us because he said, imagine this, a credit card company, that we sent him too much junk mail. And he sent us a tweet that was a little sarcastic that was basically saying, please get the hint, I don't want your credit card. And we also teach our reps to, when appropriate, mirror back sort of how a customer is talking to us. And of course we don't want them to be sarcastic, but the way that our rep answered, which I thought was brilliant, was she said, wow, we must really want you as a customer. And then to solve the problem, she said, please DM me your name and address and I'll take you off the list. And this guy wrote back almost immediately and said, I'm so impressed with that response, I'm going to apply for the card. I mean, it was like, that's the one that you print out and frame and bring to the CEO's office. This is what we're doing here. And we have lots of examples of that. So I guess I would say it is really important, to me, it's really important to respond and engage with customers, whether they have a positive thing to say or a negative thing to say. And that's what we try to do.
Did you get approved for the card?
I don't know. That's a good one.
Well, and I think that we're the same way. We try to take on every customer question, every customer issue that's negative to try to solve it for them. And one of 2 things happens. We try to solve in the channel that comes to us because we believe that that's appropriate. Now, for us, a lot of our issues happen at the local store and there's very little that I can do. So what we try to do is route them properly to the local store. And because we have all that local social, we actually use that as a way to say, which store were you at? And here, let's loop in their Twitter handle. So we stay in Twitter. We just hand them to the people who can resolve it for them. And we follow up. But sometimes it gets really complicated if it's about someone wants to know what's in one of our products and 140 characters becomes limiting. So we try to take on this idea that I'm totally stealing from someone who I cannot remember. I feel so bad. It's this idea of inviting the customer and saying, hey, it might be easier if we have a phone call, or hey, it might be easier if we're an email, but never forcing them to move over until they're really ready, unless it involves PII, right? Like at that point, if it's a lawsuit or something like that, then there's some rules that are not ours that you have to follow. But we really try to solve for them where they started. But the thing that does happen is there are people in this world that you are never going to make happy. We have a real reality, whereas we have a lot of customers who are vegans, who are very staunch animal rights activists. It's our decision as a business that we will sell meat. And so there's nothing I'm ever going to say to them that I can say to them that's ever going to make them happy. Because you know what? I don't think the business is going to decide to shut down our meat counters anytime soon. And so we will try to have an initial conversation with them that's respectful, but then at some point I think you have to disengage because it becomes a fruitless conversation. So that's one of the ones too where it's less of an issue and more of an ideology question that we just have to say we have to agree to disagree and cut off conversation. But that's almost the only time we ever do that. We never leave something unanswered if we can possibly avoid it. And I think the other thing too is thinking about trying to answer everything like we do too. We love to engage with our customers. Some of our most fun and best examples are things like that, right? Where we were having a conversation with someone that turned into a potential customer purchase. And what our business knows is there's a multiplier, and that a retained customer is worth a certain multiplier over a newly acquired customer, and that's what drives us to make this kind of an investment. So that's why we do that.
Shep, do you have a?
I'm over the marketing for our company. We're a small B2B manufacturer. And a few months ago, I was given oversight of the customer service department. And what I discovered there was that customer service treats everything more like a production line. Let's just get through this to get to the next thing. How do you, or have you had an experience going about changing the culture in a customer service environment from just getting to the next thing as quickly as possible to one of that customer engagement? Because the emails I see go out are like, you know, there's no personal, it's just standard stuff. How would you go about changing that? What processes would you use?
So did everybody hear the question? So the question was, how do you change the culture of going from more of a transaction-based, thank you, move on, to a culture where you care. You care about the customer. You genuinely care and trying to help them solve the problem. Any comments, Shep?
Sure. So first off, my favorite line is customer service is not a department, it's a philosophy. And it should be embraced by every single employee of an organization, from the CEO to the most recently hired to the person that sweeps the floors. Number two, the culture starts at the very, very top. And what you're talking about doing is moving from something that I would consider initially transactional customer service to a culture of service. So the initiative starts at the top, and I actually have a process, and I'm going to take this through in about less than 60 seconds. Number one, CEO or high-level people define it. Then it's disseminated, it's communicated, in other words, to everyone. Then it's deployed through training, and it's consistent training. Training's not something you did, it's something you do all the time, reinforcing it. Then you demonstrate it, and that means everybody steps up as a leader, especially the leaders. They set the tone. Treat the people you want internally the way you want the customer treated on the outside, if not even better. Then you defend it. If you see a problem, you see somebody not doing it, you teach them how to do it right. If they're not fitting in with the culture, too bad, I'm sad, sign dad. And finally, number 6, you delight in it. You celebrate it. You prove to everybody that we're doing a great job. You show them the success. That's the fastest I ever did in a 60-minute speech.
Can somebody tweet me that?
Dan, sorry.
No, I was just saying, if you want to tweet it, it is define, disseminate, deploy, demonstrate, defend, delight. Wow.
Well, and the only other thing I would say is I was thinking, you know, I don't have that issue because in our culture we are our culture of service. But one thing I have noticed is that sometimes it has to do with the metrics by which a department is being judged. And so if they're being judged on volume and how fast they can push through, and that's where the only place their success comes from. One possibility, and I did this in a previous job where I was trying to change the way we managed some communities, was we actually eased up on what the expectations were, and we said take a little bit more time. And then the other thing we tried to do is celebrate when someone would take the time and we would hear from a customer and they would come back. So you start to sort of, the first thing you do is change how they're measured so they feel like they have the freedom, because I think the idea is that in almost every circumstance people want to do the right thing. But if they're being measured against something that they perceive to be almost impossible or very difficult to achieve, then they're just going to do what it takes. So how do you change it from a success measure from being about doing what it takes to doing what's right? And I think that goes along with what you're talking about with the culture piece, because it really is about the culture of service. But there are some things I think you can do to create a release valve to create room for that to grow.
Right. So if you're going to be measured based on how many calls you get through in an hour versus what the results of those calls are, you're going to have a completely different metric and a completely different culture. American Express, the top level executive in customer service, is his compensation is based on net promoter scores at the front line. And he says, I don't care how long it takes, we make sure when we're off the phone that member, which is how they refer to their customers, is happy. They used to spend 25% of their training time on relationship building and the rest technical. And since this gentleman's taken over and has improved the company, they flipped it around almost to where it's 25% technical, 75% relationship building, which says they're interested in the result, not necessarily only the metric. And there is a balance, by the way. There needs to be some setting of balance.
And so that points, of course, to hiring and to bringing on the right people who are going to embody that culture of customer service and who have the right personality. I mean, you know, we've all talked to people on the phone who are, you know, who sound like we're interrupting their day and we're, you know, aggravating them in some way, and yet that's their job. I did my own secret shopper with a Discover Card rep. I was traveling overseas, and I called at what would have been about 4 o'clock in the morning in Utah, where our call center was. And I got somebody that sounded like she had just had her first cup of coffee, perky, friendly, like it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And so, you know, if you bring that back to social, I think that social is a great place for really good customer service people to show off their personality. And that's what we try to encourage our reps to do, is that, you know, 10 people might ask you exactly the same question right in a row. You don't have to answer it exactly the same way. And even if legal's telling us, well, yes, you do, there's a certain answer and you have to say these words, we still allow, even in 140 characters, for them to sign their initials or to put a smiley face or to say have a nice day or to whatever is their sort of personality. And I think on the phones, you know, it's the same thing. You can look at first call resolution, you can look at average handle time. It's hard to look at them together because one may not work with the other. And so, you know, we encourage our reps when they're looking up their account. How many times have you heard, well, hold on a minute while I look up my account, and then it's silence, right? Well, our reps will ask you how you're doing or how your day is or how the weather is or whatever. Could that lead to a conversation that makes the call longer? Of course it could, but it's a much better experience overall. And so I do think that is going to, the answer to your question is that it is going to require a culture change.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, since we're talking about KPI, you know, what should be the KPI in this new type of customer service environment? I mean, we talk about first call resolution. I think that is a good KPI, right? It measures both from a customer's perspective and it measures from the organization's perspective, sort of more on the, did we solve that problem? Did we do it the right way? But what other KPIs should there be for customer service, given that they're new?
There's no doubt in social that response time is something customers care about, and so that has to be a metric that you look at. And you know, we have really focused on getting response time down. And in fact, Shep, the industry that we've looked to is the airline industry, because they tend to be the fastest responders. They have to be, because people are stuck in an airport with a canceled flight. And I would argue that most people who are having a problem, at least with their credit card, I don't know about Whole Foods, it probably isn't that urgent. But we actually look to the airlines in terms of setting our goals for response time. So we've gone from about a 3-hour response time a couple of years ago down to 19 minutes. And we think that there's still some more minutes we can lower there. And that's a constant goal. At some point, you get to a point of diminishing returns, because we do want to be able to have that first tweet resolution. The rep has to spend the time to actually answer the problem. And if you start focusing too much on response time, then you get the answers like, well, just call us for the answer. Or you get an answer that requires another back and forth, a second or third or fourth tweet, which now you've sort of broken the model.
And I think for us it is response time. We've been working really hard during business hours to get to around a 15-minute response time. We're still working on understanding the fluctuations depending on hours in the day. And then of course you have unexpected crises. A recall will pop up for us, and being able to sort of staff up against that is something. So we look at averages over time. What I don't want to see is them crawling back up to 30, 45 minutes unless there's a really good reason. But the other thing we're looking at is implementing Net Promoter Score, right? Because we believe that a measure of satisfaction is what's really critical to us, because those things are important. And then we're also looking at a ratio of at least going from net positive to net neutral. I mean, net negative to net neutral, because we can't always make everybody a super happy camper. But we would like to be able to show that we took as many of the negatives as possible and turned them into either a neutral and ideally a positive. That's hard because it's a little bit subjective to say that we've absolutely retained the customer, so it's a little squishier. But those are some of the places that we're looking.
You can also take a look at the positive versus negative comments and just watch the ratios change based on how you're responding over a period of time. So.
Okay, question here.
So I have a question for what can brands or organizations do that only have one person monitoring social media at all times? And clearly, we've been in situations.
Hire another person.
Clearly, I've been in meetings, there's like critical meetings, and then, you know, with people complaining. And so while I'm in this meeting, competitors like, oh, we'll help you, you know, all this good stuff. And you're like, I want to respond to you, but I can't right now. So, like, what feedback do you have on, I guess, becoming better? What resources can you use? Or
so creative staffing,
yeah,
because you obviously would have hired someone, right, if they would have let you, I bet. And we've actually run into that. It's interesting. I was on a panel with someone from McDonald's, and he said one of the things that they do is they will bring folks from around the organization to help man Twitter on a regular basis. So you sign up for a shift to come help with Twitter, and it serves two needs, which it creates backup for them, but also it helps the business understand the work that they do. What we have is, I've not been allowed to add full-time resources to my team, so we have folks who work down in our stores, and we take some of their hours from the store and we bring them up, and they work on our team. And so it doesn't look like a full-time hire, but at the same time I have these folks from the stores who are able to help me for a period of the day. So I've essentially added a whole person spread out over 5 people. And what's really great is I'm creating a pipeline, so when I am able to hire, that's someone that I can do, something that I can do. And then looking to who else is willing to be your backup, right? Like how do you create a fun team where you can like take an hour here and an hour there, right? Like see if you can create, back when our team was just 2 people, we would have the backup squad for when we were in meetings at conferences, and there would be people who would raise their hand to man the channels for us while we were someplace and couldn't monitor. So I think you have to get super creative, but that's at least what's worked for us as we've tried to staff up.
You were talking about API before. Is that across all your social platforms, or just Twitter? Is it for Facebook and Twitter? Are they different?
So
like
we find, I can speak to us. We find that we have a lot of customer engagement to our marketing in Facebook, but we find that, and we have far more fans in Facebook than we have followers on Twitter, but we have far more customer inquiries on Twitter than we have on Facebook. And so, and probably 3/4 to 1/4 of our inquiries come from Twitter. So yeah, I don't want to ignore other channels, but that is where most of it.
You're speaking to Twitter.
No, so we try to treat both Facebook and Twitter. What's interesting is we have a huge Twitter following, like almost 4 million Twitter followers, and we get almost all of our customer service comes through Twitter. But we do see it on Facebook, and we manage them both through social media management. So from our perspective, they come in. But a lot of the things that we're seeing on Facebook are more of a reaction to marketing or a more generic question like when are you going to build a store in X city? But we do try to treat Facebook and Twitter pretty similarly. What's interesting is we respond to by volume less on Facebook because so much of it isn't respondable, right? Because it's like people tagging each other or going, hey, this looks tasty, and at some point you hit the wall on how many people you can respond to. And we are still trying to decide what that looks like for us in places like Instagram. As we start to be more active there, the customer service volume on Instagram is tiny, but we do see questions, and it's hard for us because their APIs make it hard to filter into a tool. And so we're still trying to decide how often should we be checking Instagram, and then also, quite frankly, what is the customer expectation on Instagram versus a place like Twitter, because I don't think a lot of people think of Instagram as in the same way. So we are trying to balance out what's right for the customer. So as new places come online, we try to treat them as their own channel to try to make those decisions.
It's interesting. It differs, I think, for industry. I'm
Mm-hmm.
in the automotive industry,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just interesting to hear.
And when we have a blog, we also moderate the blog, and sometimes we check it regularly. Also, because of our platform, I can't feed it into the same tools, so it's SLAs. Like we do try to take into account the reality of how easy it is to deploy resources across all these channels, because we want to be fair to our teams. So, I think that's very different from our phones, by the way. Like our call center folks have a completely different set of expectations relative to time. So, and ours are much more aggressive than theirs.
Dan, you were going to comment about the questions on the resource. Do you want to?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember whether you raised your hand as being in service, marketing, or other. But one piece of advice I would say is or both, or all.
Yeah.
But to me, I would engage the customer service area because, and what I would tell your head of customer service is that if we are ignoring people talking to us in social media, it's like unplugging the phone. It's like ignoring them on the telephone. Well, you would never do that, right? It's like not answering their email. Well, you'd never do that. So then why is it acceptable to not answer them on social media, or to not be able to answer them because you're stuck in a meeting, right? And so we very early moved the servicing to what I think is the right area, which is customer service. In fact, it's interesting that you were saying how the differences between your phone reps and your social reps. Most of our social reps came from the phones, and they will all tell you they love being off the phones and being on social. It's more fun. It is, being on the phone isn't always as enjoyable, and so they love their jobs. They love what they do. But it is important, I think, that they're held to the same kind of culture that we talked about, the same kind of metrics, and that they are, literally sitting among the call center reps as well. And I think that helps as well for problem solving.
Great. That one point I wanted to share with the group here. I think many of you might know Frank Eliason used to be at Comcast. I think he's now at Citibank. He shared the story where when they started Comcast, they have a very small team, like 2 or 3 people. And of course, they can't work 24/7, right? But the fact is that they were able to build up a community, and then when they're not there, when Frank isn't there, the community jumped in, right? So that takes some effort. But once you have a loyal group of community who know what you're about, what you can do, they'll be happily jumping in to fill your shoe.
Apple Computer is probably the best example of that. If you diss the Mac, look out. All these people are going to come together to defend the company they love.
Right. Question here.
A recurring theme in this conference has sort of been who owns social. And I've really heard all sides of that argument. There was even a panel on do communications and marketing need to be separate. But what I hear a lot is customer service, communications, trying to meld into marketing because that's the strongest case for ROI, which can justify your existence. And I've only heard it in a few instances, and I'd be curious to hear your feedback. What part of the organization do you think is responsible for boiling up the strategic or the things that the C-suite needs to know from what you're seeing in customer service or for what marketing is seeing in social media, and bringing that to the C-suite to drive higher level decisions? Who do you think owns that piece?
Everybody hear the question? Okay.
So I'm lucky in that marketing and then integrated media, which is where I live, for social and social media, and then PR, which is where customer service lives, all reporting to communications. And so we have a structure where that's not as big of a deal for us. But what I'll tell you is I believe that it's collaborative, right? And where we've landed is, in some cases, it depends on who is taking the lead in managing that piece of the conversation. So for example, if something is happening heavily in social, the team will look to me and my team to sort of roll that up and say, here's what we're hearing from the customer because this is primarily a social conversation. But then PR will come in and say, here's some of the coverage. And then we come together and say, and here's our recommended strategy, right? And then sometimes it'll be more of a news is driving the social. And so mostly what I'm seeing is just lots of repeats of news stories, or that's what people are calling in about. And then I'll support PR. And so we try to be pretty collaborative about who's rolling that stuff up to the C-suite, and then we use our global vice president. We're free to talk to the C-suite whenever we want, and we do that. But if it's a very big issue, then we'll actually ask our vice president to take it up for us. But we really recognize that we're all hearing from a variety of places, and so even from the stores, we'll have folks calling in from the stores who are hearing things from there. So I think that instead of the conversation about who owns it, I think it's about how do we all own it and come together to represent our various areas, which takes a lot more time, I recognize, but it's also a function of how uniquely we're organized, that we all live in comms. So
I'd say at Discover, social is really owned by marketing, but it is extremely collaborative in a similar way. I sort of look at it as I said before, my other day job is design development of our website. Now, over the years, the website has become the primary vehicle for self-service, right? And so you could say, well, maybe the website should be in customer service. But it isn't. It's in our e-business area, which is underneath marketing. But everything I do on the website, I collaborate with customer service on. Because if I put a new piece of feature functionality on the site, people are going to call about it. And I need to make sure that customer service is ready for that and that they understand, you know, the changes that we've made. So I think we treat social very similarly, is that we kind of own it, but we are in daily communication with the customer service area. First of all, to give feedback on how they're responding to customers, but also to make sure that they're aware of everything that's going on within marketing, all the product launches and the changes to the website or the mobile app or anything, or news stories, anything that could be creating feedback on you know, in a service channel.
I also think this makes a great argument for having somebody in the organization that you designate as your chief customer officer, making sure that all of these channels, all of these, all the data you get, anything that's happening on the front line being communicated up through to the C-suite, that chief customer officer can make sure that all of that happens.
Yeah, chief customer service officer. Actually, we'll be curious to think what the panel thinks. Bigger questions, right? Should there be customer service as a separate department? Should marketing and service be all under the same organization?
It's asked and answered, Your Honor. Customer service, as I mentioned, is not a department, it's a philosophy. And definitely as we look at this particular session, you know, should service, is it the new marketing? And it belongs together because it allows, and something you just said was spot on. And I'm trying to remember the exact words you used, but essentially, you know, with social being under marketing, the reason is because people used to think that social and all that was to, you know, well, actually most companies are starting to recognize that it's the opportunity to put information out as much as bring information in and deal with interactions. So they belong together, there's no doubt about it. There's a thin line. It's kind of like the difference between service and experience.
I think it depends a little bit on industry. We're in a very heavily regulated industry, so one of the things we won't be moving to anytime soon is having random employees respond to customers. We can't do that. So we do need a little bit of a dividing line, and so we can have employees talking about our brand, but when it comes to an actual customer inquiry, we have to have a certified customer service person respond. So I think there's a tactical element that has to remain separate, but for sure what Shep is saying is that philosophically they've got to be together.
Right.
And I would agree. I think it's less about reporting structure and more about willingness to collaborate, because you know what you don't want is a marketing executive who has so much on their plate that all of a sudden they become a jack of all trades and a master of none. And so the question is, you know, in our organization we have PR and marketing and digital all as peers working together. And so even though PR, I mean, even though I don't work, even though the customer service team is separate from my team and I am doing customer service, I sit outside their door, right? And I protect my ability to sit outside their door ferociously because it's the collaboration that's what really matters. So I think it's more about, do you have executives that understand that, once again, marketing is now everybody's job, and how are we all contributing to the customer journey in all stages? And that's a cultural and collaborative question. And I think if you can solve for that, then reporting structure just doesn't matter.
Okay. Question then.
Do you guys think that social media support should be 24/7?
Social customer support, 24/7.
Depends. Your customers need help 24/7?
You know, we come in the morning and, you know, something's been sitting there for 14 hours, but we set the expectation by putting hours out there. So I'm just curious because some of the higher ups are saying, we should do this all the time. I'm like, you know.
Are they willing to put their money where their mouth is and staff it?
See, and that's the big no, I was just curious.
So where I've landed in my philosophy is that the response times and what you choose to respond to changes. So I actually have social coverage 24/7. However, we do more of a focus on our 15-minute SLA-ish in all the hours that our stores are open, because what we believe is that, and this is actually based on data and volume, right? So I've come to this point of view based on looking at the data, and if in a year it changes and people start to tweet us, how do I cook these eggs at 3 o'clock in the morning, we might make a change. And so what we do instead is in the off hours when our stores are closed, we have a partner who checks in every hour for us, and they don't really respond, although we've gotten to the point where they can engage because it's fun for them too, and we have some comfort level there. And then the benefit to that is if something does start to go wrong at like 6 o'clock in the morning East Coast time, I get a call and I can jump on top of it. So based on the hours of the day, we change our perspective on response time, what you're really responding to, so that way you can get some coverage, but it's cost effective and manageable, right? So that's the approach that I've chosen to take.
I think I'm going to answer your question slightly differently and say that if you get back to the question of whether customer service is marketing, which I think we all answered emphatically yes, that my belief is that in order to, so where we are at Discover is that we are not 24/7 on social. We're 9 a.m. to midnight Eastern. We don't get a lot of volume overnight, very, very few tweets. But it's my philosophy that if we are going to market this as a service channel, which we haven't done. We've done the Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come so far, and they come, but we don't spend a lot of time telling people to come to Twitter. I believe we're going to get there soon because we've spent so much time ensuring that the service there is going to be awesome and it's going to be fast and a great experience. To me, when you go to market it, the 24/7 thing becomes more important because it's hard to market and tell people, hey, we have this great service channel as long as you're only having a problem when we're open, right? It's the same reason why call centers have gone to 24/7, most of them. So so philosophically, I believe we have to get there, and I'm working very hard for us to get there.
Natantya, you mentioned something I want to make sure it didn't get glossed over because you said it so quickly. You have a partner, which means they are not an employee, they're an outsourced group that very inexpensively does nothing more than monitor. And yet they've created a good enough relationship and your trust factor's there. So that might be a really inexpensive way for you to have that 24/7 coverage.
I mean, that's really key. There's no way, I think all businesses look at full-time staff versus dollars spent in partnerships and other project dollars differently. And so by bringing on a partner, then it gave me some freedom to, and in fact recently because of the Instacart announcement, I had to change my service levels even when my team's not there. And we used to only do an hour on weekends, and I had to change that to 15 minutes so that if we got an Instacart request that could impact a delivery, I could respond within those SLAs. And I was able to make a phone call and say, okay, you guys, I need you to go from once an hour to 4 times an hour. And they were able to say, well, it's going to cost you. And I was like, that's fine. But the fact that you have that, or when we know that there's a crisis going on, I can call them up and say, hey, can you add a person and back me up? So I think, at least for us, because we don't have an established call center, I think for some very large businesses where they have really established call centers and they've figured all this stuff out, I think it becomes a little bit easier to sort of weave social into that. For us, because it hasn't been a need for our business, I'm sort of figuring it out, and my partner is sort of indispensable in that process.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, it also depends on the industries you're in, the expectations that your customers, your fan have, right? So I think for some industry it might be very high, and others it might be okay. I think it all goes back to the response time and the expectations as well. So I know we're running very, very tight on time. I want to ask this panel one final question. If you can deliver or give one takeaway to our audience and our audience on Twitter as well, what would that be for this new era, maybe not so new, customer service is the new marketing? Let's start with Shep.
Wow, okay. Mistakes well handled. Because so much of your negative PR is going to come from some person that's unhappy with you, and the opportunity to turn them around and make them an an advocate and a promoter is powerful. So I would say what Tom Baldwin, and I have to give credit where credit is due, was the chairman of Morton's. And he said, we don't do a whole lot of marketing. We let our people who work in our restaurants do our best marketing. It's mistakes well handled with his definition of customer service. Nobody walks out unhappy. And if you can do that with virtually every customer, which is quite a lofty goal, I think you'll have an incredible marketing experience at the same time.
Thanks. Dan?
Yeah, agreed. I think one word that hasn't come up in this panel but came up in another one about financial services is trust. And financial services tend to have a fairly low trust factor. And I think that one way to get over that is to respond with and engage with your customers in whatever channel that they're in. And so if a customer wants, think about what it takes for a customer to take time out of their day to engage with a brand, positively or negatively, right? And think about what's going on in their head. And the worst thing that I think companies can do is not respond. Everybody deserves a response that first time. The timing's right. At some point, you got to stop because you're not going to please them. But I think that we look at this. I look at this as a people manager too. Feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift in your career when you have somebody sit you down and say, hey, you're doing this well and you need to work on this. It's also a gift as a company, right? And if a customer is giving us that gift, I think our responsibility is to at least return the favor, say thank you, and give them the response that they're looking for.
And I think it's a recurring theme in social in general, when we have the conversation of where does social live, and everybody always says everywhere in the organization. I think that to be successful in the new world order, you have to do two things. You have to think more broadly about your job, and you have to be willing to share the responsibility. And so we are all marketers. We're all in the business of serving customers, no matter what your title. And the businesses that inherently understand that and empower the blurring of those lines are the businesses that are really going to succeed, because they're going to answer customer questions, they're going to get them solved, and they're going to find a way to make that a culture of service. And so if you want to say, my box is this and I only do social and I'm not going to worry about customer service, then you've missed an opportunity. So how can you think more broadly and share? Because it's in the best interest of your customer and your business.
Great, great. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope that you guys have learned something from this panel. And I want to say thank you to Shep, Dan, and Natantya for sharing your experience and perspectives. Give them a big hand.